Hey, welcome to the Hall of Heroes History Podcast. I am John Osborne, and this is my friend Alan Stewart, the curator here at the Hall of Heroes Museum. And we're going to talk about one of Alan's favorite subjects.
Yeah,
You talk about this extensively
I do.
to a bunch of different, and I'll just let you explain that. It's absolutely amazing the
Yeah.
information that you have about EC Comics.
EC Comics, I'm gonna like seriously condense this because this is actually one of the things. A lot of you have seen me speak at like universities and Comic Cons, and I talk about the history of comics. And one of my more popular lectures, especially this time of year in October, is EC Comics, the original horror comics from the 1950s,
Yep.
which almost made comics cease to exist.
Right.
And EC Comics, it actually stands for two different things.
Right. It started out as a very nice thing for children and families. And it was doing like Bible stories. They were doing like history type of stuff.
Yep.
And that's what
Max Gaines.
wanted out of that.
Yep.
But
yeah, Max Gaines was it was originally called Educational Comics. And Max Gaines actually was the ex-owner of All American Comics, which is pretty much half of the DC universe.
Right.
And then he sold it to DC, and then he started another company, Educational Comics, in the early 40s. And so then he died in 1947 in a tragic boat accident. His son, William Bill Gaines, wanted nothing to do with his dad's comic book industry, his comic book company.
Right.
But mom pretty much begged him to take over the family business. He reluctantly did. And when he did, he decided, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it my way.
And he did.
He did. And honestly, Bill Gaines turned the comic book world upside down and inside out.
Yeah.
He flipped everything to horror and crime and sci-fi, and EC was probably one of the most popular comic book companies outside of DC and Timely in the 1950s. But also with fame came a lot of controversy.
Yeah. And he changes it from Educational Comics to he keeps the EC.
He does change it to Entertaining Comics.
Yes,
is the new name. So still has EC. He changes the logo around a little bit. But he starts switching everything to, and so you have like Tales of the Crypt, comes out, and Vault of Horror and Haunt of Fear are like their three main titles. And what's really cool is they each have their own, like, not sidekicks, but just, I'm trying to think what's the word I'm looking for. You had the Haunt of Fear had the old witch. So she kind of gave the intro of the stories.
Yeah, the narrators.
Narrators, yes, thank you. The Crypt Keeper, of course, was Tales of the Crypt. And then, Vault Keeper was Vault of Horror. So they were the narrators of these stories. And of course, the Crypt Keeper became very famous in the 80s with the television series. And we actually have the actor autograph here. We have, a Tales of the Crypt original 50s comic book. But a lot of people who are fans of the show didn't realize it originated with the comic books 30 years earlier in the 1950s.
Right.
But EC Comics went through a lot of controversy. You had Dr. Frederick Wertham, the child psychologist who wrote the book Seduction of the Innocent in 1954. A lot of the examples that he used where he was trying to blame comic books on the rise of juvenile delinquency was EC Comics, because EC Comics were very graphic, very violent for the times. I mean, if you think about where we were in the 1950s, there was just, the McCarthyism, there was just a lot of paranoia going on. You had not only comic books, but drugs being blamed on the rise of juvenile delinquency, comics, and rock and roll, same thing. Rock and roll was being blamed for, Elvis was the devil, and and comic books were the devil, and the only basis of his book was that he went to boys' homes and saw comic books laying there. He did no extensive research.
Right.
All kids were reading comic books at this point, not just the bad ones, the good ones too, you know? And basically, to put it in perspective, if you were a kid in the mid-1950s and you got caught with comic books in your room, it was like if you were getting caught with drugs in your room today.
Right.
That's how serious it was. I mean, the belt was coming off, man.
Right,
you
right.
know.
Yeah.
And this went to congressional hearings, and this is where the comic books code comes from.
Right.
And then you also had churches and schools doing massive comic book burnings. And this is why an action number one is worth $5 million today, because there's very few copies. Because in the mid 1950s, when this was going on, so many of these were destroyed. But I will tell you this though about the EC Comics. You know, they probably should have come with a
disclaimer,
some kind of a label,
right?
You know, like adult content and things like that. They didn't have that back then.
Right.
That's when the Comics Code came out. But what happened is, parents and teachers and churches were in such an uproar about this that all comic books were labeled as evil, not just EC Comics. Everybody got thrown under the bus,
right,
with this. A few escaped it, like Archie and Disney, where you couldn't deny the wholesome comics.
Yeah.
You couldn't deny those were wholesome comics. They escaped the prejudice and the persecution.
Right. Even though Donald Duck's not wearing pants.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Cover up that tail feather. But yeah, it was crazy times in our history, and comic books almost ceased to exist. I mean, we almost didn't have Spider-Man or X-Men or the Avengers or the Justice League or any of these great characters that we've known and loved for 60 years.
Yeah.
Almost didn't exist.
So they're taking those comics, they're trying to get rid of them, and then they do the seduction of the innocent, and then that starts to involve them, so the EC so much,
right,
that people started to be afraid to even have them at their in their comic store or
well, they didn't have comic book stores back then. Newsstands
is what I was trying to say.
Yep.
Yeah, so they wouldn't even put them out.
They wouldn't, and that's true. So what happened is, like, the last probably year, so we're talking 1955.
Yep.
That EC Comics, and this is EC Comics ended up going under late 55, early 1956, with one exception that we'll talk about in a second here. But what they had is the comics. The newsstands were, they would get the bundles of EC Comics. They wouldn't even open them, wouldn't put them out. They returned them back. So that's why EC Comics are so hard to find.
Right.
Like, we have an EC section. We probably have about a dozen original ECs in our collection. Probably the rarest ones that we have would be this. This is Tales of the Crypt, number 46, and this came out in March 1955. This is the last EC horror comic book.
Right.
And it's the last issue of Tales of the Crypt. And there's a letter inside of the comic that says, you may never read this comic book.
Yeah.
And it's true.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to find the last EC horror book because it's so rare.
Right.
Because they were destroyed, they were returned. Nobody had them. Nobody got them because they never even made it on the newsstand.
Right. There was not even available for purchase.
Exactly. So EC Comics are very collectible today. I got a buddy of mine, Scott, out of Chicago. Some way, somehow, he always gets EC Comics. And when I see him at shows, I usually pick up a couple from him because they're so hard to find. And I love them. But I will tell you this, they were probably the best well-written comic books of the entire Golden Age.
Right.
Because the stories weren't well written.
Yeah.
It was just disposable stuff. But I tell you, William Gaines deserves the credit for making, turning comic books into actual real literature that was entertaining.
Yeah.
And he changed it to entertaining, and he meant it.
Yeah.
And if you go back, Dark Horse is releasing the trades. In fact, I think they've released all the trades for all the horror titles. And there's about a dozen of them. And I've been picking them up and I've been reading them. And they still hold true today. So if you want some good horror reads, and this is Halloween, so read some EC Comics, go to, our friends at Buy Me Toys, pick up, some EC, because they carry them.
Yeah. Some
Dark Horse EC trades, or in your local comic store. We got, fans out of this area.
I didn't think that I would maybe enjoy it because it's not my cup of tea. It's not what I read.
Yeah.
when you were like, hey, check this one out
Right.
and read the letter that was written that says you might not ever read. And so then I read that whole.
Kind of hooked you, didn't it?
I got hooked on it. And so I started reading them. And they are absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I mean, they're 60 years old, but they were that well written.
They are.
They were the first comic book company to really work on, Marvel gets the credit and Stan Lee for in the Silver Age being the first well-written comics. That's actually not true. EC a decade earlier in the 50s started it, and probably influenced Stan, because Stan was reading other companies' stuff, and I'm sure he read EC books.
Yep.
No doubt about it. But yeah, definitely read EC books. They're great. One of the new things, it's not on exhibit yet. Well, it probably will be by the time this episode goes up.
I would say.
But I've been, we go to the heritage auctions and we get a lot of artwork.
Yep.
The last couple of years, we've really worked on our art collection, and I've been wanting to get an original piece of EC comic art. The comics are very expensive. Just imagine how much the art is.
Right.
So we just got in an original, one of the production pieces from one of the covers. We have the actual book just by coincidence.
Right.
Our 10, 15 original ECs, we actually happen to have the one that we got the original cover art for.
Yeah.
So this is going to be going on exhibit. It's very cool. Definitely recommend you checking out some EC stuff, especially right now. You could also pick up like House of Mystery, House of Secrets from DC Comics. Those are some great horror stories. Weird War Tales.
Yeah.
Another really great, if you're a war and a horror buff, Weird War Tales by DC from the 70s and 80s. I've read the whole run of those. Those are fantastic stories. Creature Commandos. So if you're a fan of Creature Commandos, they were introduced in Weird War Tales issue 93.
Right.
So
very cool.
Yeah, check out some, read some good horror stuff for Halloween and have a great time.
Yeah. So for Alan Stewart, I'm John Osborne. I hope you enjoyed all the great information. Make sure that you come and visit the Hall of Heroes. Alan,
hold on. One more thing.
Go
I
ahead.
forgot to say.
Go ahead.
Okay. EC Comics. Okay. The one thing we forgot to talk about.
Oh.
So EC Comics. Okay. So they stopped publishing in 1955.
Right.
But what they did is they continue with Mad Magazine.
Well, EC becomes Mad Magazine because EC says, you know what, you can't write this stuff in comic books because comic books are for children.
Right.
Somebody comes in and grabs that little loophole and says, well, we're not a comic book. We're a magazine.
Yep.
Because magazines could be directed towards adults. That was completely fine.
Right.
So they said, we're not a comic book, we're a magazine.
Right.
So EC goes from comic book, they widen it, they stretch it, and then we get Mad Magazine. So that's actually where Mad Magazine comes from.
Yeah, the first actually issues 1 through 22 of Mad Magazine was Mad Comic Book. Issue 23 in 1956, they switched from the comic format to the magazine format.
Right. And
continues for until DC bought them in the 1960s.
Yeah.
And paid gains a crap ton of money for Mad Magazine, and so they were only producing one thing.
Yeah.
But it was a hit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't believe we almost forgot to tell you that.
Right.
That
exactly.
is one of our favorite.
Yeah,
parts
that's a pretty. Yeah, it's a pretty big thing. Yeah.
So, anyways, we thank you guys for watching this and listening to us talk about EC Comics. Alan has a lot of information. Come to the Hall of Heroes. Check out our exhibit that we have here. It's going to be even bigger by the time
we're getting ready to expand it. That's right.
Yeah, so it's going to be really cool. So for Alan Stewart, I'm John Osborne. This has been the Hall of Heroes History Podcast, and enjoy your comics.